welcome once again guys to the NPTEL module on strategic trade and protectionism, facts and figures, where we have been discussing the exact or the core aspects of protectionism. We have already started with the lecture on tariffs, and this is our lecture number 30, week number 6, where we are going to give the latest facts and figures of effective protection. The effective protection we have already started in the last lecture. So, this lecture is meant for identifying the latest facts and figures from important sources for our better understanding. Now, this is myself Pratap C. Mohanty, a faculty member in the Department of Humanities and Social Sciences, IIT Roorkee. Now, as I have already explained that under the purview of WTO negotiations, various tariff rates are defined, and those tariff rates actually over the time have been reduced, though now number of questions raised over the confusion relating to non-tariff. So, in the next lecture or next week onwards, we are supposed to talk about non-tariff barriers and the nitty-gritties of trade. Now, as I already mentioned, since the Uruguay round, where the countries committed to actually reduce the tariff and to bind their customs duty rates to level which are difficult to reach. Now, even in the Doha agenda continues to effort or efforts are given in the direction of agriculture and non-agricultural market access. Now, so far as the WTO members and their negotiation on tariffs are concerned, those tariffs are broadly divided into two types. One is called bound rate, as I already mentioned in our earlier lecture. Another is called one is called bound rate, another is called applied rate. Bound rate, where the ceilings are defined according to different schedules or list of commitments, whereas the applied rates are the rates where member country can change and which can be lower than the bound rates, generally lower than the bound rates. As per the WTO estimates, India's applied most favored nation import rates are 13.8% and highest of any major economy. We will discuss now in this particular lecture. We will be confining our discussion to the latest facts and figures and India's position in the tariff rates. So far as Indian tariffs are concerned, we are counting the facts and figures. So, therefore, it is important to emphasize the effective protection accordingly. So far as the tariff Indian tariffs are concerned, Indian tariffs average 5% or less on industrial products in developed nations, but are much higher in developing nations. So, in 2018, Indian government in cooperation with the FIEO debuted its trade portal. India had its trade portal from 18 and publishes applied tariffs and other custom duty rates applicable to import. This is the source where you can follow all those latest tariff rates practiced by India. So, Indian trade portals provides information on the latest tariffs and duty as per the harmonized standard codes. So, India's tariff regime is also characterized by pronounced disparities between WTO bound rates and most favored nation applied rates charged at the border. So, most favored nation, I think recent episodes with the Pakistan is quite familiar to all of you. So, usually most favored nation, where at once a country is granting that, it has to be equal to all the most favored nations. Usually those rates are much lower than that of the rates to non most favored nation states. According to the latest facts of WTO, India's average bound rate, which is where the ceiling rate is defined and usually higher than that of the applied rate, is 48.5%, while simple MFN average rate is only 13.8%. So, this is as per the 2017 data of WTO. Now, India's average WTO bound tariff for agricultural product is much higher. Now, we will also discuss why this kind of products where the rates are actually very high, and to protect those informal sectors. Applied tariff rates are also relatively high on a weight traded basis. The average agriculture tariff is on so far as applied tariff rate, not the bound rate, it is only 32.8%. In addition, while India has bound all agriculture tariff lines in WTO, over 30% of India's non-agriculture tariff remain unbound. Okay, though agriculture tariffs are bound by the WTO norms, so remaining 30%, I mean over 30% are yet not. For non-agriculture are unbound, there is no WTO ceiling on those rates. So, therefore, there is no binding defined. So, given these large disparities between bound and applied rates, US exporters face tremendous challenges or an uncertainty because of India's flexibility to change tariff rates at any time as per the WTO norms. Now, the latest figures from one of the UNCTAD report, I am referring this document as published by the UNCTAD report. UNCTAD secretariat calculation based on the figures of WTO. Now, what they observe, since we are discussing the facts and figures of protection, what it counts, it actually counts in terms of effects or affects by tariff, how it affects. Now, in the chart 1 we are discussing the trade affected by tariffs in different sectors, whereas in chart 4 we are discussing trade diversion by usually by these days there is a trade war as we discussed between China and US. So, because of this trade war, how these figures have been getting diverted. Now, if we just try to talk about or understand trade affected by tariff, now out of the broad important 5 sectors presented in this table, it is easily visible that the manufacturing intermediate products, especially manufacturing products at the bottom mentioned, are most affected sector so far as tariffs are concerned. So, manufacturing sector are the most affects by tariff, whereas energy or agriculture is least affected. So far as the trade diversion due to US and Chinese tariffs are concerned, now here it is the deep shaded portion is Chinese tariff and the light shaded portion is by US tariff, where how it diverges trade. Now, the highest diversion of trade due to this trade war or the tariff imposed by these two big nations, highest are to the European Union. It has created huge diversion. I have already discussed trade creations versus we have not discussed, we have only discussed intra industry trade versus inter industry trade. Trade diversion we mean some member countries used to have certain possibility, certain extent of trade, but due to some kind of agreement or due to some kind of restrictions they divert from one country to another country. That is all about called trade diversion. So, European Union as a whole has been examined that the trade diversion has actually been the highest due to this effect. Now, followed by Mexico, the list is around the Pakistan, Peru, as we know that these countries are having less trade, less association, even Iran. Now, similarly looking at India's perspective in this figure, India's perspective, it is also affecting among the top 4 or 5 group. Chinese effect is higher for India as compared to the US effects of imposition of tariff. Now, looking at other perspectives, these are expressed in US billion dollar. Now, other effects of US tariff, let us examine by trade diversion or by return by China or trade loss. These 3 aspects is explained. The deepest or the contrast color is explaining trade diversion, where which is written by China, and trade loss is highlighted in the lighter color. Now, looking at the world trade, this is basically world trade for different sectors. Now, it is clearly visible that due to those effects or due to the US tariff, this diagram is for chart number 3A is for US tariff, whereas chart number 3B is for Chinese tariff. In case of US tariff, it is clearly understood that machineries or electrical machineries where the trade diversion is examined to be the highest. And because of the case that US has restricted huge number of imported goods with higher tariff for Chinese products. So, this has diverted their product so far as trade is concerned, and so it is by retained by China is a little portion in that particular aspect, and I mean still even if tariff is imposed by US. This much is still written by China. Now, so the least is observed in case of oil or gas, coal, petroleum products, where highest is observed in communication related equipment, machineries. Similarly, when the China imposed tariff on the products, trade diversion is again observed in case of chemicals, vegetable products, motor vehicles, machinery products again, but least is again observed related to oils, transport equipments. They are different depending upon the basket of commodities consumed by the bigger nations. So far as Chinese tariff is concerned, since China is not importing much due to higher tariff, so this diverges the trade from from one country to another country, or also reduce the trade as well. What about average import and export restrictiveness by regions? If you talk about different regions, and these are important facts to be unfolded for better understanding. I feel that TTRI stands for as a notation for one calculation for import restrictiveness, whereas in the right diagram we are explaining export restrictiveness. These are from 2008, 2016 and 2017 figures. Now, look at import restrictiveness. These are based on average imports. So, highest is observed in South Asian countries and followed by Sub-Saharan Africa, and the least is in the developed countries so far as import are concerned. So, they have less restrictions towards imports, whereas export restrictiveness usually very less imposed by the countries, but still even highest in East Asia and Southeast Asian countries. These are the calculation from the Comtrade 2018 of UNCTAD. Now, counting the average tariff again by weighted index in comparing with 2008 to 2017 figures. Now, here in the left hand side we are discussing average tariff, here we are discussing by sector. Average tariff by countries broadly, but even largely we categorize with sector as well, with broad sectors. Now, look at average tariff is actually higher on the aggregate for agriculture sector, followed by manufacturing. So, now look at these two very carefully, which says that East Asian countries has the highest, though the rate of change has been significant over time, and even South Asian countries, the 2017 figures is actually higher as compared to 2008 so far as average tariff in agricultural products is concerned, but in East Asian countries this rate has been reduced. Now, counting the average tariff by sector, as we already said, the tariff is much higher in vegetable, apparel, training, animal product, textile, food, etc. Whereas oil, mining, communication products, the tariff line is very less. So, therefore, those products are also traded internationally with huge volume. So far as peak tariff is concerned, tariff peaks concerned by countries and by sector. Here we are referring to broad sectors So, here we are referring to countries and 3 specific segments. Now, peak tariff we mean the trade with applied tariff of 15% or higher, wherever whichever the country having highest. Even we also checked with their figure for HS 6 digit lines, which is which is disaggregated at a 6 digit level with a tariff of 15% and higher. So, it is observed that Southeast Asian countries, especially South Asian countries and East Asian countries are also having highest peak tariff. And so far as natural resources and their tariff is concerned, it is the least. And understanding the peak sectors where tariff lines are very high, it is food products, animal, apparel, training, vegetable products, etc. So, these whereas oil, natural gas mining, coal, etc. are attaching very less peak tariffs. Now, one of the important aspects of our understanding of the latest facts and figures through tariff escalation. I think we have already mentioned somewhere in our earlier lectures that tariff escalation is the practice of imposing higher tariffs on intermediate goods, higher tariff not on intermediate, rather higher tariff on the finished goods in order to facilitate trade for the intermediate goods. So, finished goods are charged with higher tariff as against the intermediate goods. So, I mean basically this present a tariff structure of many countries. This is the cases of figures or in practice by many countries. And what we have observed here, most developed countries, now looking at escalation by sector on the right hand side, and this is by country. Most developing and developed countries actually follow escalating strategy of tariff structures, but to of course to different varying degrees. Tariff escalation is actually more pervasive in manufacturing products than the agricultural one, more pervasive in manufacturing. Now, therefore, in South India, look at this, it is very pervasive. Look at primary, intermediary and the finished or the consumer goods segment, where the consumer is finally even. This is increasingly very high. Similarly, for agriculture also this is much higher. Now, largely it has been followed that the developing countries have higher forms of tariff escalation. Now, by sector again here there are certain changes. Non-metallic minerals attaches higher tariff escalations. Training, I mean the change between primary I mean look at these changes, primary, then intermediary or intermediate or the final, the changes are huge. Now, similarly the changes are also observed much higher in apparel or training related trade. Whereas the base metal, mining, coal, even communication attaches much lower tariff escalations. And the reverse is observed in case of oil and fats, where the primary products, because primary are more or less the I mean there is hardly any difference between the primary and the finished products. There are very less number, therefore, the reverse trend is observed in case of oil and fats related products. Similarly, petroleum products as well, I mean very less number of countries process it and redefine the products differently. So, therefore, it attaches different order all totally. So, these are called tariff escalations followed in different countries. Now, looking at tariff restrictiveness in a matrix by region, look at we have already understood that South Asia countries, South Asian and East Asian countries usually have higher tariff rates from the previous figure as compared to other nations. Now, let us calculate or let us observe with two lines of comparison. This is one. Now, in this we can also compare this as well, and also we can have a comparison with developed countries all as well. Now, looking at the South Asian perspective, For the developed countries, their tariff restrictiveness is 10.7%, whereas among the South Asian countries it is 10.4%. Then among the where the trade is being taken place between the Latin American countries, it is 17.8%, whereas for this for the East Asian countries it is 10.4. For their own South Asian country, usually they have huge number of agreements. So, therefore, the tariff lines are low or the restrictiveness are low. With Sub-Saharan Africa it is even lower, transition economies is little higher, West Asian and North African countries it is little higher. So, the least is between these two countries so far as the matrix of South Asian restrictiveness is concerned for the products those are being imported to the South Asian countries. Now, how the developed countries actually react, retaliate, it is not the figure mentioned here, but how they practice. Now, it is visible from here that they impose only 1.6% on among the OECD countries or among the developed countries, whereas this is little higher among East Asian countries, even higher than that of the developed and the South Asian countries. These rates are much lower than that of the South Asian restrictiveness. Now, if you look at the change over two time period, here we are mentioning 2018 and 2017. The changes are actually the fall usually is observed between these two periods, much higher especially for Latin American countries, and increases they have increased their restriction to the developed countries, it is positive, also among the positive among the transition economies. That means, the South Asian countries have been becoming more protective towards the developed countries and developing the strategy to restrict the products of developed countries, and while facilitating trade among themselves. So, this is one of the very finest calculation made by UNCTAD Secretariat based on the data Comtrade data of 2018. This is a very latest report I followed for your better understanding. So, you can also have a check on your own if you wanted to understand this figure carefully. Then let us move to the understanding of tariff in a map. This is again look at the source is UNCTAD Secretariat calculation on Comtrade and UNCTAD trans data. We have already mentioned. We will also talk about those data later. Now look at the import restrictiveness, especially by tariff lines. Very high restrictive rates are observed, more than 7.5% are observed with the deep shaded color. Now, look at India among those countries, India, Pakistan, even near about those South Asian countries are observed to be much higher. Some of the countries in African also having the same, in Latin American countries also having the highest rates. Now, as I already said, the developing countries, these are largely the developing countries or developed countries, they practice higher restrictiveness, whereas there has been a continuous fall or is a reduction. The rates are much lower for other countries, especially for the among the developed nations. Look at this portion, even this portion, even this portion, the magnitude of taxes or the extent of taxes towards restricting the trade or towards tariff is much lower, whereas in developing countries it is higher. So, therefore, this map also clarifies your understanding of effective protection. What about export restrictiveness? Usually countries do not prefer to go for protecting their exports or restricting their exports by imposing tariff. I think in that regard, except there are some countries, Latin America countries and Pakistan, they also have certain restrictiveness towards their trade, whereas largely many countries, even the South Asian countries also prefer not to restrict their exports, because those exports are actually creating export restrictions would actually hinder their trade and will undermine their effects on trade. So, it is, I think, clearly understood, guys. Now, what we have already explained in the previous lecture, we need to actually revisit with certain examples of effective versus nominal rates of protection, though I have already explained some of it. Those effective one, what we have already said, that it is not just the nominal tariff, it is the effective one, the exact impact through the tariff on intermediary goods. Some of the intermediary final products, primary products we already discussed through examples. Now, let us understand through another important example, and its calculation. I think, as I told you already in the last class, through the value added approach there were some confusions. Let us clarify it now. Some of those examples are also valid or to be verified or to be clarified at the time of question and answers. So, we will have, I mean, this will be very useful, this slide will be very useful for preparing your question and answer section. So, let F be the final good, there are good A and good B are the intermediary products, A and B is used to produce 1/8 of F. In case of free trade, let the value of the price of the final good is 1000, whereas the price of these intermediate goods for A variety is 500 and B variety is 200. Now, these are the final goods so far as before tariff is concerned. So, the total value added is, of course, I mean the price of intermediate goods is 500 plus 200, that is 700 and the price they are selling, or the final price they are selling at the market is 1000 minus 700. So, 300 is the pre trade or free trade without any tariff free trade value added. Whereas, with tariff lines, let it be a higher tariff for final product and a little lower tariff for the intermediate products. So, let 10% be the tariff after trade on the final product and 5% on commodity A and 8% on commodity B. So, let us understand the total price or total value after tariff. Now, total value is originally it is 1000 plus 5% plus 10%. So, that is 0.1 of 1000, this is 100. So, 100, so it is equal to 100 plus 1000 is 1100. Whereas, in other two it is 525 and 216. If you again subtract these two, we will get 359. We have subtracted these two from the new value added. After tariff, this is 359. So, the new tariff, I mean the value added is 359. So, as per the value added method, new value added minus the original value added divided the original value added is nothing but the effective rate of protection. How much extra we add value due to tariff on different levels. So, 359 minus 300 divided by 300, it is basically 0.197, this is 19.7%. So, therefore, the effective rate of protection is 19.7%, whereas the nominal protection is only 10%. So, effective protection is better than that of the nominal one. This is the equation we have already explained. I mean, in another approach we can also calculate the effective rate of protection. We have already verified, you can go and check in detail and especially you need to check with AI. The AI, as I told you, is the percentage of value added to the final good. How much the raw materials or the imported inputs used in the production of final good, usually varies from 70 to 80%, 90% like this, and TI is the tax on the raw materials which are imported or the tariff. So, T stands for the tariff on the final product. When there is no inputted inputs, that means AI is equal to 0. So, therefore, when AI is equal to 0, so nominal tariff is nothing but the effective rate of protection. But when TI equal to 0, there is no tariff on the finished products. on the intermediary products. When there is no tariff on the intermediary products, it is for sure that intermediary products is attaching with no restrictions. So, that means the numerator this portion is this portion boils down to be 0, and accordingly we can find out how much content of AI. So, accordingly we can define. So, given the fact that 10%, if it is 80%, Ti equal to 0, G equal to 50%. So, now just compare, this is equal to 10% where this is equal to 50%. So, we have already verified, and these are given for your clarity, you can follow it off and try to understand in a detailed format. Now, this is the diagram referred I mean to the original diagram made by Chai and Tanti. So, basically where effective rate of protection as compared to nominal rate or the nominal rate of protection is observed. Now, look at the intermediate product and the valuated product. In case of if there are certain differences, free trade as compared to with protection. Here also we are discussing free trade with compared to protection. Now, look at this among these, I mean look at the change here, look at the change here, change is very less, where the value added is much higher. So, therefore, when the value added is much higher as against the intermediary values, so the effective rate of protection is much higher than that of the nominal rate. It is a simple protection, I mean interpretation we have already mentioned. Now, similarly, when the change is much higher, change is very steeper here for intermediary products being imported as against the value, this is very less, value added is comparatively much lesser, the effective protection is not so effective. So, this is one of the very interesting interesting interpretation made by Tanti in his diagram. It is a very simple diagram to be followed. So, with this we have presented so many facts and figures of latest trends of tariff on different categories of products, by product, I mean by HS classification, by sector, by countries. So, I think you might have enough idea of tariff being practiced in different countries for their protection. In the next lecture we are going to discuss, basically in the next week lecture we are going to talk about non-tariff barriers in detail. So, here we are closing the tariff related barriers. We will have comparison for non-tariff and tariff barriers as well in the next week as well. So, I think this is clearly understood to you. With this I should stop here. Thank you.